Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Bruce George Peter Lee. Mouthful. We are off to Hull today, up north. Let's go.
Sin and Tonic!
Hello my loves, how are we all today? It is hotter than the sun here and the shed is stifling. Ironically, today's case is all about fire, and I am on fire. Let's dive in to a paddling pool. Oh. On the 4th of December in 1979, Edith Hasty, 34, mum of 7 children, was at home at 12 Shelby Street, Hull. She was at home with 4 of her 7 children, her 4 boys. The 3 girls were out at sleepovers with friends and family that evening. Thankfully for them, because Edith would wake in the early hours of the morning with a feeling that something wasn't quite right. She went out of her bedroom, and that's when she saw that flames were just speeding up the stairs. She went into her eldest son's bedroom. He shared a bedroom with his 2 other brothers, Peter and Paul. One named Peter, one named Paul. Fly away, Peter, fly away, Paul. Come back, Peter, come back, Paul. There's a nursery rhyme. I've lost hearing him in an ear. Why? Oh, it's ringing. So she woke Charlie, who was 15. He was the eldest. Peter and Paul were younger. He came out into the hall to help his mother, and they tried to get back to her bedroom, but this fire was spreading quickly, and they couldn't get back to her bedroom, which was terrifying because her 9-year-old son, Thomas, was still asleep in that room. He slept with her because he had muscular dystrophy and struggled to walk and would need help sometimes. Even more terrifying that he is trapped now. Realising that there was no way they were going to get back to her bedroom to rescue Thomas, Charlie heroically pushed his mother out of his bedroom window, thus saving her life. Thus, Sophie, please. But he didn't follow his mother out of the window. He wanted to try and save Peter and Paul. They were in the same bedroom as him. They must be awake at this point with all the commotion going on. However, by opening his bedroom window, it had enraged the fire. What do you call that? It fed the fire. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I mean. So it was too much. The room became engulfed in flames, smoke. It was awful. They were covered in burns, all 3 boys. The 3 boys were rescued by the fire service, but sadly they would all die over the next 2 weeks. Charlie died that night, Peter 2 days later, and then Paul 12 days after that. Thomas, the 9-year-old that they couldn't get back to rescue, he had managed to get himself out of a window at the back of the house and he survived. So Edith has just lost 3 sons in 2 weeks. It was determined that this fire was an act of arson. Somebody had deliberately set this fire. There were 2 spent matches at the doorstep and a really strong smell of paraffin and like a pool of paraffin by the door. Somebody had poured paraffin through the letterbox and then set it alight. The fire investigator went on to say that it looked like this had been lit by somebody that had done this before. The community were, I'm going to say like happy. They were quite happy, or they weren't sad about the death of these 3 boys. The Hasty boys had a reputation for trouble, and it sounds like they caused a lot of it. At the time of the murders, the arson attack, their father, Tommy Hasty, was actually in prison, and this was a common occurrence. And he was the sort of father that would encourage his children to follow the same path that he has, and he would often recruit his boys when he was going out making mischief, causing trouble, breaking the law. He was a notorious petty criminal. The family were well known to the police. They were called out often. These boys really did terrorise the community. I'm not saying that they deserved to die in a horrific way like that, but they were, I'm just painting the picture for you. They would stone people's properties. They would break in. They would urinate through letterboxes. That's gross. I know that's like, it's terrorising, isn't it? It's petty crime. But can you imagine just having to deal with that in the morning? Oh God, it'd be so annoying because I think they just kept on doing these things to people, and they would target certain people as well, just make their life hell for a little while. Sometimes they would leave other presents on the doorstep of people's houses. Yeah, They would ruin people's things, they would vandalise local property, and they were bullies, so they would steal from the children in the area if they were out and about. Antisocial behaviour doesn't even quite cut it. Like, they were just, they were terrorising the community. So it wasn't a surprise particularly that they wouldn't be missed. However, even the police were shocked at the complete lack of compassion. And this also meant that there were so many suspects, really, because everybody around the family, everybody in that local area hated them. It was a strong level of hate, and so many people that would have wanted to seek revenge. In the week leading up to the fire, Edith said that a horrible note had come through the door on a piece of cardboard, and the house had obviously been burnt, but the cardboard note had actually been at the back of the house that hadn't been damaged so much by the fire, so she still had it, amazingly. And she showed this to police. I'm going to read it out to you. A family of effing rubbish. Nice. We all hate you. You should all live on an island. Devil's Island. I'm not kidding, but I promised you a bomb. By hell, I'm not kidding. Why don't you just split while you've got the chance? If we can't get you out normally, then we will bastard well bomb you out. Okay, and that's too good for you. Ooh. The police then, clever thinking, they took samples of everybody's handwriting in the local area and they found a match. The match was a little old lady that had been terrorised consistently by the boys in the family. She had written the note, she confessed to writing the note, she said that she didn't even want to waste the paper, so she wrote it on cardboard. But the lead detective, Sagar, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's S-A-G-A-R, Sagar. I'm going to say Sagar. Sagar! You know, the computer. Anyway, whatever. So Sagar, he dismissed her as a suspect because she was old, she was frail. He didn't believe that she had lit the fire. Although we have had cases with old grannies doing things, haven't we? So never ever judge a book by its cover. But spoiler alert, it wasn't her. The boy's funeral was on the 4th of January 1980, and it was... Edith went crazy because her children have died. They might have been awful around the community and, toe rags, but they were her children. She loved them very much, and she really believed that somebody in their community had done this. So when people came out to watch the funeral procession, she lost her rag. And she was shouting, saying that one of you bastards has done this. And it was quite a heightened affair. But can you blame her? And then a witness came forward, because not many witnesses were coming forward. People didn't like the Hasties. They weren't going to be sharing information about this case. No, thank you. Like a lot of people were like, they got what was coming to them. There was not much compassion at all. However, witness came forward. He said that he had seen 2 men around the area and near the Hastie house, suspiciously. He also said that then he saw them leaving and jumping into a Rover 200 car. I need to look up that car. I want to see what it looked like. I'll share a picture. And there was a getaway driver. So that is odd, isn't it? That is suspicious. And this sounded more like a professional hit than just an aggrieved neighbour. Now, the house next door to the Hasties was a known drug dealing place. So the police thought, could these people have hit the wrong address? They meant to get this drug deal, because there's always beef between, it's like gang wars and drug dealers and stuff like that. So they thought that it had been a case of a mistaken property, wrong house. The police also put drivers of Rover 200s under surveillance. That's crazy, isn't it? Maybe there's not many of those cars in the area, but they had surveillance on the drivers of that make of car. And then, this must be so annoying, the original witness that said, I saw two fellas and they hopped into a Rover 200, came back to them and said, guess what, mates? I got the date wrong. I didn't see them on that night. I saw them on a different night. And he was genuine, he'd made a mistake, and he came forward to let them know, but that's freaking annoying. However, all was not lost. During their surveillance of the Rover 200 drivers, they had witnessed some suspicious activity. One of the drivers, a naughty, had been driving round scouting for sex with teenage boys. Male prostitution was rife in this area, and they would often frequent like the city's public toilets. It's just... Police decided to interview some of these teenagers that are involved in the gay prostitution, just to see if they could connect any dots. I think they were clutching at straws at this point, and they needed some leads, and they just tried their luck. One of the young men that they brought in for questioning was Bruce George Peter Lee. He did actually change his name for that reason. He wanted to be called Bruce Lee. That was not his original surname, but he changed it by deed poll. So for the rest of this case, we're going to call him Lee, because I cannot call him Bruce Lee, because it's, it'll make me want to chuckle, and it's not a laughing matter. Lee mentioned that he had had sexual encounters with one of the Hasty brothers, the oldest Hasty brother, Charlie. So this actually meant that their shot in the dark had worked, because Charlie did have a connection with this community. I'm not sure where this was all going to kind of go and what dots they were trying to connect, but anyway, it was something. Trying to learn as much as they could to see who could have possibly set their house on fire. Lead detective Sagar, he decided to take another sort of shot in the dark. It was a punt, really, and he had brought in a few of these teenagers to interview, and he decided to accuse all of them of starting the fire, in the hope that they would panic and they would share the name of somebody that really did start the fire. It was all, again, a shot in the dark. He was hoping that, he was calling their bluff. He was like, you did it. I think you did it. And just hoping that he would get something out of it. Oh, and he did. He did. Something he was not expecting at all. Lee wasted absolutely no time whatsoever in confessing. I didn't mean to kill them. What? Holy mackerel. He is sitting here and he is confessing to starting the fire that killed the 3 Hasty brothers. As a detective, you've just got to be like, wait, what? Charlie, the oldest Hasty brother, was blackmailing Lee. He said that he was going to tell everybody that Lee was gay and that he was a prostitute if Lee did not continue to give him money. So he was blackmailing Lee. And Lee wanted to start the fire to get back at Charlie. Lee also said that he had a crush on Charlie's younger sister, and that the Hasty family really bullied him and picked on him for that. Lee was often bullied and picked on, and had been throughout his life, and this mockery just tipped him over the edge. Lee was born on the 31st of July in 1960 in Manchester, and he was actually born Peter George Dinsdale. His mother, Doreen, was a prostitute, and she was unkind to him from the get-go. She called him a freak. He was a sickly kid. He was deformed. He had a deformed right arm, he had a deformed right leg, he walked with a limp, and he also suffered with epileptic seizures. Lee never knew who his father was. He left when he was a baby, and his mum gave him to his grandmother when he was a baby, because she just, she was like, oh, broken baby, no thanks. And, she was a prostitute, so she was going out to work. Lee would live with his grandmother until he was 3 years old, and then he spent the rest of his life in and out, and it's so annoying. Every single case, normally, it just seems like it, is people are let down and things go terribly wrong. When will we learn? He was in and out of different children's homes. He was not having a good time. He was picked on his entire life. He went to a school for physically handicapped children, and he was there until he was 16 years old. At 9 years old, Lee became obsessed with fire. He loved to light bonfires and things like that. And then at 9, he set fire to a shopping centre. Nobody was in it, but it caused £17,000 worth of damage when he was 9. In his interview, Lee went on to describe the arson attack at Shelby Street that killed the Hasty brothers. He said that the idea was just to give them a fright, Charlie mainly. Sagar knew from the confession that it was genuine, because Lee knew about the 2 spent matches, and that he said he tried to light it twice and it didn't work. He said about putting the paraffin through the letterbox, and it explained, it was a detailed description of what the evidence was saying had happened. So he knew he had his man, but there was more to come. I want to say this is where it gets spicy, but I just feel like It just gets spicier and spicier, this one. When Lee was arrested, it was, of course, all over the newspaper that they had caught the person that had set fire to the Hasty house. Ross Fenton read that news article and she was interested because she had been in a house fire herself in 1979 and she strongly believed that it had been a deliberate attack. She had seen a figure at her front door. She had seen a hand come through the letterbox. However, she thought she recognised the person as Daft Peter. That's right, that was his nickname. Pleasant. Daft Peter. He was a bit simple, everybody thought. So as well as having a deformed arm and a limp and a deformed leg and suffering with epilepsy, I don't think he was the sharpest of tools in the box. Hence Daft Peter. So she believed it was Daft Peter at her front door, and he was known to be a bit of a nuisance and to do some odd things. So she just dismissed him. She was heavily pregnant, so she went to bed. And then she was woken in the night by people shouting, "Fire, fire." So she got out of bed, she went to get her 7-year-old daughter, but they struggled to get out of the house. Again, the fire, it accelerated, it was just quick, it engulfed everywhere really quickly. So they ended up not being able to get to the front door, they ended up in the living room, huddled in a corner together, and they both got burnt, they both inhaled lots of smoke, but they both survived. Sadly, Ross lost her baby. Because Ross and her 7-year-old daughter hadn't died, and it was the baby that had died, there was no inquest, and the fire was ruled an accident, apparently due to a visitor earlier in the evening dropping a cigarette on the carpet. And in the report, she never ever mentioned the sighting of Daft Peter at her door because she just thought it was nothing at all. When she saw the newspaper article and saw who they had arrested, she decided to call the police and let them know what she'd seen that night. They went and they spoke to Lee again and asked him about this fire. And again, he just confessed. When they asked him why, he just said because he liked fire. At this point, Sagar has to ask him if he's set any more fires, because it seems like this is a recurring theme. And he's all too happy to share his stories, of which there are many. He goes on to tell of a time where he broke into a house through an open living room window and he sprinkled paraffin all over the living room floor. He then set it alight and left. This was the house of Karen Thacker. She managed to save her older children in that fire, but her 6-month-old baby, Katrina, perished. This was the 2nd of January 1977. It was cited that a spark from an open fire caused the fire and that it was an accident. Lee was known to the family. Lee used to frequent Pete Thacker's pigeon loft. He seemed to like the pigeons, okay? So he would go up to the pigeon loft and he was interested in Pete's birds, but he would often overstay his welcome and he was a bit odd and he did strange things. And a day before the fire, Pete Thacker ended up giving Lee a clip round the ear and telling him to go away. As Lee continued to talk about the fires that he had set, Sagar wanted to prove that these confessions were genuine. So he got in a car with Lee and he asked Lee to direct them to the houses and the properties that he had started fires in. And he was able to do so. He directed the police to all of the different locations. He began with an old people's home that he had hit in January of 1977, only 3 days after lighting the fire that had killed baby Katrina. This fire killed 11 elderly men. He said that he'd wanted to pick a big house to break into and set fire to. No arson was suspected again. This is not like CSI at all, is it? At all. He was only 16 years old at the time of this fire. 16. Next, he took officers to Askew Avenue. Askew? It's all gone askew. He claimed that this was his first murder. He had only been 12 at the time. This was the home of 6-year-old Richard Ellerington. Richard went to the same school as Lee, so Lee knew that that's where he lived because he was on the bus when Richard would get onto the school bus. On the 23rd of June in 1973, Richard's parents had gone out for the evening, leaving their 6 children with a babysitter and the babysitter's own baby. At 2:30 a.m, his parents came home, they had a little chat with the babysitter, and then all of the adults went to bed. And they left the windows open because it was a hot evening. And it would only get hotter because they woke up to the house on fire. And everybody survived except for Richard, which is just terrible. 6-year-old Richard. Lee could not explain why he had started that fire, what reason. It wasn't like he didn't like Richard. He had no reason whatsoever, but it definitely started this compulsion to set fire to houses. And he actually became very good at it. So for somebody that is considered daft Peter and has a very low intelligence, he always seemed to start these fires and then get away without any trace. Following his first fatal fire, he would strike again on the 12th of October in 1973. He went to the home of 72-year-old Arthur Smythe. He was in ill health, and Lee went to the property. He saw that one of the windows in the front of the house was broken, so he just went there by chance. He saw that and he broke in and he set fire to the house. This fire was blamed on a faulty paraffin heater. October the 27th, not long after, in the afternoon, Lee came across the home of 34-year-old David Brewer. He was out of work due to an industrial accident. He got up from the sofa, he went to the loo, and when he came back, his front room was on fire. In the commotion, his clothes caught on fire, so he ran out into the street ablaze, screaming. A neighbour did try to help him, but it wasn't quick enough, and sadly he died later on. That's just horrific, isn't it? No arson suspected again. It was thought that the fire had started because he was drying his clothes in front of the open fire. Now, Lee was known to Brewer. They had had an argument, and Brewer had threatened to punch Lee in the face. Again, it was something to do with pigeons. What is it with this guy and pigeons? But he was talking about, he was something about the pigeons. Brewer's friend Lister had pigeons, and I think Lee was being a bit of a pest, again overstaying his welcome, and they were sort of like in an argument, and Lee said, "I will kill your pigeons," to Lister. And Brewer said, "No, you won't. If you do that, I'm going to punch you in the face." So there was a disagreement. Lo and behold, a few days later, Brewer is then engulfed in flames. Bit much, isn't it? And then a few days after that, Lister discovers that all of his pigeons are dead. All of their necks have been wrung. There was then about a year respite before Lee would strike again. This time it was the home of 82-year-old Elizabeth. She was partially sighted. She couldn't walk anywhere without a frame. She was very frail, and she died from smoke inhalation. The fire was started in the bedroom this time, and it was ruled as misadventure, like she'd been having a cigarette in bed, but the family were adamant that that is not something that she ever did. But that is what it was ruled as, an accident, misadventure. Lee wasn't known to Elizabeth, and it's thought that this was just another random attack, and that he targeted her house because her back door was left open. She left it open for her cat. Then there's another large gap, and then on the 3rd of June in 1976, James and Veronica Edwards were the next targets. They were out for the evening, but Veronica's grandma was at home, Dorothy. She was babysitting the 3 children. Dorothy had just put the 18-month-old Andrew to bed, and when she came downstairs, she saw fire coming out from the cupboard under the stairs, or smoke. The fire spread again incredibly quickly, and it meant that baby Andrew was then trapped upstairs. Everyone got out apart from baby Andrew, who died in the fire. Their 5-year-old son, David, he confessed at one point to starting that fire with matches, but the family were adamant that there were no matches in the house, or that if there were, like one of them always had the matches in the pocket. Like the mum always had matches in her pocket. They weren't in the house, so it wouldn't have been possible for him to start the fire. So that was just like ruled out as a child. He was 5, just saying things that he didn't know anything about. And then Lee confessed. He said he broke in and that he started the fire under the stairs. At the beginning of 1977, he started the fire that killed baby Katrina, and he also started the fire that killed the 11 men at the nursing home. And then April the 27th of the same year, he targeted the Gold family home. The Golds were at home, and so was their friend Peter Jordan. He was sleeping down in the front room, and his 2 children were upstairs having a sleepover with the Golds family children, if that is English, what I just said. He woke up at 3 a.m. to the house on fire. So he, sounded the alarm, told everybody fire, and tried to wake everybody up and tried to rescue everybody. Sadly, one of the Gold's children and one of Jordan's children perished in the fire. Now, this is just awful, but the cause of the fire was determined to be a cigarette that Peter Jordan, he was sleeping in the lounge, had lit and then forgotten about and fallen asleep. So can you imagine, he thought for years that he had killed one of his own children by not putting a cigarette out. And then Lee came along and confessed. I just can't imagine that guilt. Like, that's just, whoa. This is such a long one on a hot day. But I will continue because, and also this is one of the few cases that I don't know if I have covered up one or two, I think, where children are the victims of the crime. But, it just gets to me, it really does. But with this case, it was almost, it was almost like it spoke to me because I had not heard of this case before, and it's huge. It's a UK case and it's a big case. We'll talk about why at the end. But I kind of just was like, no, these children, I mean, a lot of them were children, died, and it just feels a bit forgotten about. So I really wanted to cover the case, actually, even though it is heartbreaking and it does involve children. But yeah, I couldn't really believe it. It speaks a lot to media, actually. But again, we'll talk about that at the end. 6th of January 1978. Here we go again. Reynolds Street Hill, the home of Christine Dixon. She had 4 children. This is possibly one of the more disturbing fires. Christine had popped round to her next door neighbour's house, Kathleen Hartley. She left her 4 children in the front room of her own house while she quickly went round to see her neighbour. When she returned to her own house, she saw that the front room and the windows were filled with black smoke. I mean, can you imagine? She went in and she grabbed the baby Brian, and rushed him out to Mrs. Hartley. She then returned into the front room to rescue her other 3 children. Mark, who was 4, Stephen, who was 3, and Michael, who was 17 months. Mrs. Hartley was waiting outside of the property, and then she witnessed something just horrific. She was looking into the house, and a ring of fire just enveloped the living room and engulfed all 3 children and Christine, and she just watched it happen. It was just like that, just so quick. No arson was suspected. They thought that the children had played with lighter fluid that had been left in the living room and that they had set fire to the front room. Lee said that he had with him a washing up bottle with paraffin in it, and that he had just chosen their house by random, and that he had squirted that lighter fluid in through the letterbox. Now their front door just went straight into their living room, so that paraffin just went straight into the living room area. He then set that on fire. We are now at 10 fatal fires. Lee confessed to 26 deaths between 1973 and 1979. And in that time, he was never, ever caught. I know I'm acting surprised about it. However, I did look into it because I was like, what? It just seems, because I'm thinking of modern day fire investigations and stuff like that. But it was in the 70s. So I did some learning. House fires at that time were incredibly common. And I'm talking about more common. It's sad. It's terrible. For a number of reasons. Everywhere had open fires. It wasn't like central heating, or if it was, that was rare. It was open fires in every home. So that just means there's going to be more fires, house fires going on. No fire alarms. No fire alarms. We take it for granted, don't we? Not only that, but furniture, especially the soft furnishings and stuff like that, then they were highly flammable. So it was just a mixing pot. It was just a disaster. Also, the fire forensics was primitive. It wasn't, like it is now. Also, pair that with a criminal that was an arsonist that was never ever detected at the scene. So there was never a sighting. There was one, and she didn't actually say that she'd seen Daft Peter, did she, Ross? So nobody had actually said, oh, we saw this. He was always undetected. Smoking was common, and smoking indoors was okay. It was the done thing. Also, when house fires happened in poor areas, the police didn't pay as much attention, sadly. In his interview, Lee would say that he knew when he was going to start a fire because his fingers would begin to tingle. He said he particularly liked to start fires in houses because he had never had one. And that says a lot to me. We let people down. It's difficult to talk about it because these people have done these awful things. But a lot of the time, when the people that have done these awful things have come from hell, it's not an excuse, but it does explain behaviour a lot of the time, because you just think, it's not a coincidence. There's a reason why children that have been abused, a lot of these serial killers have come from very similar pasts and sketchy backgrounds and abuse and alcoholism in the family, normally the parents and stuff like that. It's common, isn't it? And it's like, we need to do better here. We need to help those children. More needs to be done to support and nurture and love and create a healthy environment, home life for those children that have come from horrificness, and it doesn't seem to be a priority. And I just think, well, when you feel like, let's go in at the source. What do I know? Lee was declared fit to stand trial, which he did on the 20th of January in 1981. He pleaded not guilty to 26 counts of murder, but he did plead guilty to 26 counts of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Lee was detained in a maximum security mental hospital where it was ordered that he should stay there for the rest of his life. Lee has killed more people than any other British serial killer. I didn't know who he was. He received very little national publicity. Very little. I think I know why. A very high-profile case, Peter Sutcliffe, his trial and all of that was all going on at the same time. So this is what I'm saying about media, like the media attention. But it just boggles my mind. Is there only room for one case at the time in the press? It would seem so. So because of that, it was been and gone afterwards. It's not a good news story anymore. And I don't know how I feel about that. I think angry. And then there's a kind of twist in the tale. First of all, there was a public inquiry as to how, rightly so, as to how Lee could have committed all of these crimes when he was under the care of the local authority. Yeah. This is what I'm saying. So he was in care, but just out and about. And I know that things like that have changed. I do know that. I think if children are in care, they can't even go on a school trip or go and see a friend without having to sign 100 bits of paperwork or whatever, their foster parents and stuff like that. So I think things are in place. We have learnt. But he was effectively just out and about, unsupervised. In 1983, a further inquiry found that the care home where 11 elderly men had died, that fire actually was an accident. It was an accidental fire, and that he had not committed arson there. Fire investigation supported this, and it was called into question how he could have possibly done what he said he had done. So he had a deformed arm, and he said that he'd left his home carrying a can of paraffin on his bike, and that he'd cycled. So they were saying, how could he have cycled, but then why confess? And then this sort of throws into question all of the other confessions, because if he's lied about that one, what else has he lied about? Also, this is somebody with lower than average intelligence. He's called Daft Peter. What's going on? Can any of his confessions be trusted? The 11 deaths at the care home, they were taken off of his record. That was, they said you did not do that. And to me, it really does. I'm very confused about the whole thing, because he was deemed fit to stand trial, but he's obviously troubled. Why did he confess to something that he actually did not do? Did he feel that he had to? Was he coerced in some way? Were they trying to solve things? Was he pushed into confessions? Did he just want to confess? Did he want to be there was something special about him for the first time ever. People were paying attention to him, listening to him. In my gut, I do think he started the fire at the Hasty House, and then it completely snowballed. And then he was getting a lot of attention, a lot of eyes on him, people caring for the first time. I know that sounds crazy, but for somebody that just has been picked on and talked down to and is stupid and all of this, and then all of a sudden, look at this, is that what happened here? Some of the fires, he had a connection to the victims, and he'd been hit or told off, possibly he had committed arson and in those addresses. But what about the others? It just throws it into question, doesn't it? In 2021, there was a new appeal, and this argues that his physical disability actually would hinder him from committing nearly a lot of the things that he's been accused of. You know, breaking into a house, jumping through windows when he's got a deformed arm and a deformed leg and a limp and he can hardly walk properly. It's sort of like throwing that into question. Like, could he physically have done what he said he's done? It argues that he only confessed due to mental health issues and not understanding. In 2022, it was found that he could not have possibly committed 2 of the arson attacks. So he was acquitted of those crimes, but all of the other convictions were upheld. But to me, so what? So 1, he didn't do it. Why did you confess? And then 2 more? Oh my God, it's really, I find that really tricky. However, I feel like he did commit the hasty crime, and that did kill 3 people. I need to now think about nice things and fluffy bunnies because it just makes me sad. That is all I have for you on today's case, my loves. Tell me what you think about this one. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What do you think? Do you think he committed any of the fires and the murders? I'm kind of thinking that I might have to move operations into the house. I was going to try and have a pretty sort of background and set some things up like that, but I think I'm just going to have to go for it. I think I'm just going to have to do it because it's too hot. It's too hot, man. And then also in the winter, it's too freaking cold. I do not want to be ungrateful for my little shed of love because, oh, that sounds a bit wrong, doesn't it? All I do up here, guys, is film for Sin and Tonic. In the spring and in the autumn, it's fabulous. But then in the summer and in the winter, it's too cold and it's too hot. So, yeah, we'll go with the flow. Love it. Anyway, I'm going to love you and leave you because I'm turning into a soup. I will see you all next week. Bye.